What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors walks onto a daytime talk show and finds himself under attack from a host who refuses to listen? In just 43 seconds, Denise Welch's shocking accusations would turn a simple interview into an explosive confrontation that ended with security being called and a guest storming off set. This is the story of how a routine appearance on Loose Women became one of the most dramatic moments in British television history. Gary Oldman arrived at the ITV studios that morning, expecting a pleasant chat about his latest film. The legendary actor, known for his roles in everything from Dracula to the Harry Potter films, had done hundreds of interviews over his decades-long career. He thought this would be just another friendly appearance on the popular daytime show, but from the moment he sat down on that purple sofa, something felt different. The Loose Women panel that day included Denise Welch, Janet Street Porter, Colleen Nolan, and Kay Adams. The studio audience clapped warmly as Gary walked out, smiling and waving. He shook hands with each of the hosts and settled into his seat, looking relaxed and ready for what he assumed would be a lighthearted conversation. Denise Welch, sitting in the center position as lead host, opened with what seemed like a standard question. "Gary, lovely to have you here," she said, though her tone already carried an edge that made the other panelists glance at each other. "Your new film is getting a lot of attention, but I want to talk about something else first. There are some people who say you've been difficult to work with over the years. What do you say to that?" Gary's smile faltered slightly. "This wasn't the usual warm-up question. I'm sorry, I don't know where that's coming from," he replied carefully. "I've worked with the same directors multiple times. They keep asking me back, so I must be doing something right." The audience laughed, appreciating his gentle humor. But Denise wasn't smiling. "Well, that's not what I've heard," she shot back, leaning forward aggressively. "I've heard stories. Lots of stories." Janet Street Porter jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. "Denise, come on, let's talk about the film. Gary, tell us about your character." But Denise held up her hand, silencing her colleague. "No, I think this is important," Denise insisted. "The public deserves to know who they're really watching." Gary's expression shifted from confused to concerned. "I'm not sure what you want me to say. If you have specific questions about my work, I'm happy to answer them, but vague accusations aren't really something I can respond to." Colleen Nolan tried to intervene. "Maybe we should move on. Gary's here to talk about his new project, aren't you, Gary?" "I'd love to," Gary said, gratitude evident in his voice. But Denise wasn't finished. She pulled out a piece of paper from beside her chair, making a show of looking at it. "I have it right here," she announced dramatically. "A source says you were rude to crew members on your last 3 films, that you made demands, that you refused to come out of your trailer." The studio went quiet. Even the audience seemed uncomfortable. Gary sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. "Who is this source?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Because none of that is true, not one word of it." "I can't reveal my sources," Denise replied smugly, crossing her arms. "That's convenient," Gary said. "So you can say anything you want, attribute it to an anonymous source, and I'm just supposed to accept it?" Kay Adams touched Denise's arm. "Maybe we should verify this before we discuss it on air." "I have verified it," Denise snapped at her fellow panelist. "I trust my source completely." "But I don't even know who your source is," Gary pointed out, his frustration growing. "How can I defend myself against accusations from someone who won't even put their name to it?" The audience began murmuring. Several people could be heard saying, "That's not fair," and "let him speak." Denise ignored them. "What about the incident in Los Angeles? When you allegedly shouted at a production assistant? What incident?" Gary asked, genuinely baffled. "I have no idea what you're talking about. When was this supposed to have happened?" "You tell me," Denise said, her voice dripping with accusation. "I can't tell you because it never happened," Gary replied, his voice rising slightly. "This is absurd. You're making up stories." Janet Street Porter tried again to rescue the situation. "Look, we're getting off track here. Gary, your new film looks brilliant. Can we talk about that?" "Yes, please," Gary said, turning to Janet with relief. But Denise cut across them both. "I'm not finished. I think it's important that we address these issues." "What issues?" Gary demanded. "You haven't presented a single fact, just vague accusations and anonymous sources. That's not journalism. That's gossip." "Are you calling me a gossip?" Denise's voice went up an octave, offense written all over her face. I'm saying that if you're going to accuse someone of something on national television, you should have actual evidence, Gary said firmly. Not rumors, not hearsay. Evidence. I don't need to justify myself to you, Denise said, her tone becoming more defensive. I've been doing this job for years. I know how to conduct an interview. Do you? Gary asked, genuinely curious now. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you came in here with an agenda. You weren't interested in having a conversation. You wanted to create drama. That's ridiculous, Denise protested. Is it? Gary challenged. You started making accusations within the first minute. You didn't ask me about my film. You didn't ask about my process. You went straight for the attack. Janet Street Porter nodded slowly. He's right, actually. This hasn't been a normal interview. Denise turned on Janet. Not you two. I'm just saying, Janet continued. We usually start with the pleasant stuff. The film, the experiences, the funny stories. This has been confrontational from the start. Colleen Nolan nodded. He's got a point, Denise. Denise whirled on Colleen. Whose side are you on? I'm not on anyone's side, Colleen said, looking uncomfortable. I just think we should be fair. Fair? Denise laughed bitterly. These Hollywood actors come on our show and expect us to treat them like royalty. Well, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to ask the hard questions. Hard questions are fine, Gary said, his patience clearly wearing thin. But that's not what you're doing. You're making accusations. There's a difference. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut. Audience members were shifting in their seats, unsure where to look. The other loose women panelists exchanged worried glances. Denise picked up another piece of paper. What about your political views? Some people say they're quite extreme. Some people? Gary repeated. Who are these people? Do they have names? I'm asking the questions here, Denise said sharply. No, you're making statements disguised as questions, Gary corrected her. If you want to know my political views, ask me directly. Don't hide behind some people say and anonymous sources. Kay Adams spoke up, her voice diplomatic. Gary, what are your political views? In your own words. Gary turned to her gratefully. I believe in treating people with respect. I believe in honesty. I believe in doing your job to the best of your ability. Beyond that, my political views are my own business. See? Denise pounced. You won't even answer the question. I just did answer it, Gary said, exasperation creeping into his voice. What more do you want? I want you to admit that you're difficult, Denise said, her voice getting louder. I want you to admit that the rumors are true. I'm not going to admit to something that isn't true, Gary said firmly. That would be lying. So you're calling everyone who's ever said anything negative about you a liar? Denise pushed. No, I'm saying that you haven't given me any specifics, Gary responded patiently. You keep talking about rumors and stories, but you won't tell me what they are, who said them, or when they supposedly happened. How can I respond to that? Because you know exactly what I'm talking about, Denise insisted. I really don't, Gary said, spreading his hands. I genuinely have no idea what incidents you're referring to. If you told me specifically, maybe I could address it. But this vague approach isn't fair to either of us. Kay Adams leaned forward. Denise, maybe Gary has a point. Could you be more specific about what you're asking him to address? I don't have to be specific, Denise said stubbornly. He knows what he's done. But he's telling you he doesn't, Colleen interjected. Maybe you've got the wrong information, or maybe it's about someone else. It's not about someone else, Denise snapped. I checked. I verified. This is about him. Then tell me what it is, Gary said, his voice rising slightly in frustration. Give me something concrete to respond to. The audience started clapping, supporting Gary. Denise's face flushed red. Don't you dare, she said, pointing at the audience. Don't you dare applaud him. You don't know what he's really like. And you do? Gary asked. You met me 15 minutes ago. I've done my research, Denise insisted. Research? Gary's voice was incredulous. Reading tabloids and listening to gossip isn't research. Janet Street Porter tried once more to intervene. Can we please just move on? This is getting out of hand. No, it's not getting out of hand, Denise said. I'm holding a powerful man accountable. Accountable for what? Gary asked, spreading his hands. You still haven't told me what I'm supposed to have done. You've made vague accusations, cited anonymous sources, and now you're acting like I'm on trial. For what crime exactly? For being a typical arrogant actor? Denise spat out. The other panelists gasped. Even for loose women, known for its frank discussions, this was going too far. That's completely uncalled for, Colleen said firmly. Denise, you need to apologize. I'm not apologizing for speaking the truth, Denise replied stubbornly. It's not the truth though, is it? Kay Adams said quietly. You don't actually know if any of this is true. You're just repeating things you've heard. And what makes you so sure I'm wrong? Denise challenged her colleagues now, turning her anger on them. Because we've been sitting here watching you attack this man for 10 minutes and you haven't provided a single shred of actual evidence, Janet said bluntly. Not one name. Not one specific incident, just vague claims and accusations. I told you, I have sources, Denise insisted. Anonymous sources aren't good enough when you're destroying someone's reputation on live television, Kay said firmly. You need more than that. Gary had been listening to this exchange, watching the other panelists defend him. He looked touched but also deeply uncomfortable. I know what I know, Denise said defensively. Gary stood up slowly. I don't have to sit here and be insulted. I came here in good faith to talk about my work. Instead, I've been ambushed with baseless accusations and personal attacks. Sit down, Denise commanded. We're not finished. Yes, we are, Gary said calmly. I'm leaving. You can't leave, Denise said, panic flickering across her face. We're live on air. Watch me, Gary said, starting to remove his microphone. Denise jumped up from her seat. If you walk off this set, you'll prove everything I said about you is true. You'll prove that you are difficult. Gary paused and looked at her steadily. No, if I walk off this set, I'll prove that I have self-respect. There's a difference between being difficult and refusing to be bullied. Bullied? Denise screeched. I'm the bully? You're the one with all the power here. You're the famous actor. I'm just a television presenter trying to do my job. Your job is to interview guests, not to attack them, Gary said quietly. There's a difference. I was asking legitimate questions, Denise protested, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. No, you were making baseless accusations, Gary corrected. There's a world of difference. A legitimate question would be something like, tell me about your preparation for this role, or what was it like working with this director? What you did was ambush me with rumors and then get angry when I couldn't defend myself against things that never happened. You're twisting my words, Denise said weakly. I'm not twisting anything, Gary said. Everyone here heard what you said. Everyone watching at home heard it, too. You can try to spin this however you want, but the truth is clear. Janet Street Porter stood up too. Gary, please don't go. Denise, please apologize. This has gone too far. I have nothing to apologize for, Denise insisted. Then I have nothing more to say, Gary said, pulling off his microphone completely and handing it to a floor manager who had appeared beside him, looking stressed. Colleen tried one last time. Gary, we're so sorry about this. Please stay. We'll change the subject completely. We'll talk about your film. Gary gave her a sad smile. I appreciate that, Colleen, but I can't stay. This isn't a healthy environment. You're being oversensitive, Denise called out as he turned to leave. Gary stopped and turned back. No, I'm being reasonable. You've accused me of things I didn't do, refused to provide any evidence, insulted me personally, and now you're trying to make me feel bad for leaving. That's not how adults behave. Don't you lecture me, Denise said, her face now bright red. I've been in this industry for decades. Then act like it, Gary said simply. The studio fell silent. Even Denise seemed stunned by his calm, direct response. Kay Adams broke the silence. Gary, I'm truly sorry this happened. You deserved better. Thank you, Gary said. You all did your best to keep things civil. I appreciate that. He nodded to Janet, Colleen, and Kay, pointedly not looking at Denise. Then he walked toward the exit at the side of the studio. Denise wasn't done. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she shouted after him. You think you're too good for us. You think you can just walk away. Gary stopped at the studio door and turned back one final time. I don't think I'm too good for you. I think I deserve basic respect. Everyone does. Even Hollywood actors. You haven't heard the last of this, Denise threatened. I hope I have, actually, Gary said. Then he pushed through the door and was gone. The moment the door closed behind him, chaos erupted. The audience burst into conversation, some people standing up. The floor managers rushed around trying to figure out what to do. The three remaining loose women panelists turned on Denise. What were you thinking? Janet demanded. That was completely unprofessional, Kay added. You ambushed him, Colleen said, shaking her head. That poor man came here expecting a nice interview, and you attacked him. I was doing my job, Denise insisted, but her voice had lost its aggressive edge. She suddenly looked uncertain. Your job is to make guests feel welcome and have interesting conversations, Janet said firmly, not to put them on trial based on rumors. They weren't just rumors. Denise tried to argue, but she sounded defensive now. Then who was your source? Kay asked. If it's so reliable, tell us who it was. Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at the piece of paper in her hand, then crumpled it up. The director's voice came through their earpieces, though viewers couldn't hear it. From the panelists' reactions, it was clear they were being told to go to a commercial break immediately. Janet turned to the camera. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about. She trailed off, clearly unsure what they would be talking about since their guest had left. We'll be talking about what just happened, Kay finished for her. Because that was unacceptable. We're still live, Denise hissed at her. Good, Kay said, staring at Denise. People should know. The show cut to commercials, but in the studio, the argument continued. Audience members could see everything. The three panelists surrounded Denise, all talking at once. You've embarrassed us, Colleen said. You've embarrassed yourself, Janet added. And you've treated a lovely man terribly, Kay finished. Denise tried to defend herself, but the words came out weak and unconvincing. I thought he could handle it. He's an actor. Being an actor doesn't mean he should have to handle abuse, Janet said sharply. How would you feel if someone treated you that way? Denise didn't answer. She sat down heavily on the sofa, the reality of what she'd done beginning to sink in. Behind the scenes, producers were scrambling. Gary Oldman had left the building entirely. Security footage would later show him walking straight to his car without stopping, his face set in stone. Back in the studio, the makeup artists approached the panelists to touch up their makeup before they went live again. But the damage was done. The three other women were furious with Denise, and it showed. A producer rushed onto the set, speaking quickly and urgently to the panelists. From their nodding, it was clear they were being given instructions on how to handle the rest of the show. When they came back from commercial, the atmosphere was completely different. Denise tried to smile at the camera, but it looked forced. Welcome back, Kay said, taking over the hosting duties. As you all just witnessed, our interview with Gary Oldman ended unexpectedly. We want to address what happened. It was unfortunate, Denise said, trying to sound casual. It was wrong, Janet interrupted. Let's be clear. What happened there was wrong. Colleen nodded. Gary Oldman is a respected actor who came here as our guest. He should have been treated with courtesy and respect. Instead, he was ambushed with unverified accusations. I had sources, Denise tried to protest weakly. Anonymous sources making vague claims aren't good enough, Kay said firmly. If you're going to accuse someone of something on live television, you need solid evidence. You didn't have that, the audience applauded, showing clearly whose side they were on. Denise's face crumpled slightly. I was trying to ask tough questions. There's a difference between tough questions and attacks, Janet said. You crossed that line. Way over it, Colleen added. Kay turned to the camera. We want to apologize to Gary Oldman. He deserved better from us. He came here expecting a professional interview, and he didn't get it. I'm sorry too, Colleen said to the camera. Gary, if you're watching, we're truly sorry. Me as well, Janet added. You handled yourself with grace and dignity. We should have protected you better. All three women looked at Denise expectantly. The silence stretched out. Finally, Denise spoke, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, she mumbled. We can't hear you, Janet said, not unkindly but firmly. Denise looked up at the camera, her eyes slightly red. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. It wasn't the most gracious apology, but it was something. The show continued, but the energy was gone. The remaining segments felt flat and awkward. Denise barely spoke, and when she did, the other panelists talked over her or contradicted her. The power dynamic had completely shifted. During the next commercial break, Denise left the set. She didn't return. The other three hosts finished the show without her, and they seemed relieved by her absence. Meanwhile, outside the studio, Gary Oldman sat in his car for a moment before driving away. His phone was already ringing with calls from his agent, his publicist, and various news outlets wanting statements. But he didn't answer. He just started the car and left, putting the whole awful experience behind him. Back in the studio, as the show wrapped up, Janet Street Porter said something to the camera that summed up everyone's feelings. "Let this be a lesson," she said. "Treat your guests with respect. Treat everyone with respect, actually. It's not difficult. It's just basic human decency." The audience gave her a standing ovation. Kay and Colleen joined in, clapping along. It was their way of showing support for Gary and disapproval of what had happened. As the credits rolled and the show ended, the audience filed out, buzzing with excitement over what they'd witnessed. Many of them were already on their phones, no doubt sharing what they'd seen with friends and posting about it on social media. The 3 remaining Loose Women panelists gathered their things and left the set quickly, not wanting to linger. They had a lot to discuss with producers about what had gone wrong and how to prevent it happening again. In his dressing room, which he'd left so abruptly, Gary's untouched cup of tea sat cold on the table. A production assistant came in to clean up and found his visitor pass still sitting there, barely used. She picked it up sadly, thinking about what could have been a lovely interview, but instead became a disaster. The makeup artist, packing up her kit, shook her head. She'd worked on hundreds of shows and had met hundreds of celebrities. Gary Oldman, she would later tell people, was one of the nicest, most polite guests she'd ever worked with, which made what happened to him even more unfair. The floor manager who'd taken Gary's microphone stood holding it, replaying the moment in his mind. The way Gary had remained so calm, so dignified, even as he was being attacked. The way he'd thanked the crew on his way out. The way he'd handled himself like a true professional, even when others around him weren't. In the control room, the director sat back in his chair, exhausted. In his 20 years of working in television, he'd never seen anything quite like that. He'd seen awkward interviews, sure. He'd seen guests and hosts disagree. But he'd never seen such a blatant ambush, such unprofessional behavior from a host. The show's producer was already in emergency meetings with ITV executives, trying to explain what had happened and how they would address it. This was going to be a public relations nightmare. They knew it. Everyone knew it. But in all the chaos, in all the emergency meetings and crisis management, one thing was clear to everyone who'd been in that studio. Gary Oldman had been the good guy. He'd walked into a trap, handled it with incredible grace and dignity, and removed himself from a toxic situation. He'd stood up for himself without being aggressive. He'd called out unprofessional behavior without being unprofessional himself. That's what made him the hero, not because he was a famous actor, not because he had power or influence, but because when faced with baseless accusations and personal attacks, he responded with calm reason. When insulted, he didn't insult back. When provoked, he didn't lose his temper. He simply stated his case, defended his reputation, and left when it became clear the situation was irredeemable. And that's what happens when a respected actor meets a talk show host who forgets that guests are people who deserve respect. 43 seconds. That's all it took for Denise Welch to turn a routine interview into a disaster. 43 seconds of accusations, of attacks, of unprofessional behavior that shocked viewers and colleagues alike. And in those 43 seconds, Gary Oldman showed the world exactly what kind of person he really is. Not the difficult, demanding actor that Denise tried to paint him as, but a professional, a gentleman, and someone who knows when to walk away from a fight that isn't worth having. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to stay and argue. It's to stand up, state your truth, and leave with your dignity intact. And that's exactly what Gary Oldman did.